Thanks. So my name is Darko, and I'll talk about a tool we made, a Webpack plugin we made, so we can use it with some other backend technologies. So as you may assume, well, Webpack is awesome. So you can do pretty much everything with it, well, except dynamic imports. Well, but so what if you want to use Webpack with Node, or with PHP, or Rails, or Django, Spring, Rust, Swift, Haskell, or COBOL maybe? What? Sure. So maybe you want to use it with COBOL. So how? Well, there is a way. First, let's look at Webpack with Node.js. So Node.js is kind of a special case here because, well, it's the same language, and if it's the same language, it's much easier to run it. There are three approaches. One of them is unique. One of them is generic, so it will work for all technologies, and two of them are specific to Node. So first one is serving the static assets. So you just use the Webpack like you would usually, and you just serve the static page either using Nginx, Apache, or Express, or whatever. And that's fine if you're using, if you're working API first, and you don't need to actually use Webpack in Node. The second approach is to monkey patch the node require method. And that way, when you call the require, it would actually pass through Webpack. And you can do this, for instance, with the Webpack isomorphic tools plugin. But, well, you shouldn't, because first, it's really buggy. And second, it's not officially recommended. Well, for the same reason, actually. The third approach is much better. So you can pass the Node.js code, which is also JavaScript, through Webpack. So let Webpack transpile your Node.js code and run it after that. For that, you can, for instance, use universal Webpack, but you don't have to. You can use it directly. How you do this? You basically create two Webpack configs. One is targeting the web, and the second one is targeting Node. What that means is it will actually react differently when you require something. So if you require FS module, which is specific to Node, it will know, OK, don't do anything with it, just pass it along. Leave it like it is. Node will take care of it. And what this approach allows you is to use hot reloading. So that means that you start the server, you open the browser, and you don't need to refresh anything. When you change the code, you save it in your editor, and it will reload automatically without refreshing the page, mostly, which is really useful for fast development. So except for Node, you may want to use it with some other languages or frameworks. For instance, we use it with Ruby on Rails. So this is kind of an usual flow of the of a web request when you're using Rails. So it will go to the request will go to the router, to the controller, which will communicate with the model, then to the view, and the view will talk with asset pipeline, which is Rails mechanism for assets, and it will say, OK, I need those files, and asset pipeline will give it file names or whatever, and the view will respond to the browser. And then the browser will get the assets from the asset pipeline. And that works, but it's much slower, it's less powerful, and there are multiple reasons why you would want to use Webpack with Rails. So what we did, we created a Webpack asset pipeline plugin, which is a generic solution for pretty much all the languages and frameworks, and I'll explain why. So it was created by those guys. And well, what it does, it actually creates a manifest JSON file with file mappings. So when you require some files, for instance, images here, what it will do, it will process them like it usually would with Webpack. But except for that, it will also create a manifest JSON file. And it will say, OK, I have application.js, as an entry file, and application 6.3 whatever is the output file. And images file 1 is the input file, this is the output file, and etc. So you'll have mappings from the original files to the output files. And with that, you can write helpers in the different languages. So for instance, you can create a Webpack asset URL helper in Rails, which will read the manifest JSON file, and when you give it the logo SVG, it will look up in the manifest and say, okay, I need to replace this with the process file. Or the other solution is to monkey patch the existing helpers. So in case of Ruby on Rails, you can monkey patch the asset helpers, and you can use the same code you would use with, as before. So the same methods the original asset pipeline exposes. So the workflow here is a little bit different. So Webpack can either watch or be run at once, and it will create a manifest JSON and the assets. And when the request comes, it will go to the router controller view, and at that point, the view will, via the helper, ask for the manifest and do the mapping. And when the browser needs the assets, it will go to the file system for the assets that Webpack prepared. What that allows us also is to use hot reloading. So you can actually use hot reloading with Rails or PHP or whatever language you use. So hot reloading is pretty easy for CSS. So you can use it pretty much out of the box. So if you change some CSS or SCSS, it will change in the browser automatically without reloading. For JS, it's a little bit harder. It's easier with React than for others, but it's possible. And for that, you can do two things. You can either use Webpack Dev Server, which is a simple server that serves the assets that Webpack prepares and supports hot reloading out of the box. Or if you need something more complex, you can always combine the Webpack Dev middleware, which is something similar, with the Express server. This is a Node-specific web server, and it's really extensible, so you can use middlewares. And if that sounds too complicated, I actually created a boilerplate that combines those two. And at that point, the workflow looks like this. So all the requests you do to the browser, it will go through the Webpack. And at that point, Webpack will decide, okay, this is the HTML request, and I'll pass it through to the Rails, which will process it. Or this is an asset, and I'll respond with the asset. And Webpack will decide if it should push the changes to the browser automatically, since everything is going through it. And at that point, when you're using Webpack in develop mode, what it will do, it won't actually save the assets to the file system. It will keep them in memory. That's for multiple reasons, mainly for performance, etc. But the plugin will save the manifest to the file system because the Rails helper will need to access it. So that's it for the Rails example. On this URL, you can find the whole documentation, including the Rails helper implementation. But if you want to use it with other technologies, or you want to contribute, we would appreciate pull requests for some other technologies. And if you want, we can give support however we can for other technologies. And that's it. Thanks. Questions?
Questions? Anybody?
Yes?
Okay, there are.
I'm not sure if I understood correctly. Did you achieve hot injection with the Rails server or not?
Well, not for the Rails code, but for the CSS code, it's pretty easy. We have that running, and
I'm not talking about like live reload. Actually, hot injection, no refreshing and rack or whatever.
yeah, for CSS, yes. For JS, if you're using React on the front end.
Okay, because you have to handle the
Yes.
change of JS. It's not
Yeah, so
switch out.
Yeah, for CSS it's simple because you basically just replace the CSS file and that's it. But for JS, your client-side code actually needs to handle that. So Webpack will send the command and say, okay, something changed, here's the new file, do something with it. And your client-side code, which is probably a library you're using, will know, okay, that's the code, I need to replace those functions. And then basically it depends how your app is structured, if that's possible. So it's possible for React because the components are stateless, and if you replace the components, you won't lose anything. Okay, other questions?